Hi everyone, welcome to the Bestiary. I'm here with some more videos on Mexican Black Kingsnakes. Today we're going to be talking about whether or not a Mexican Black Kingsnake is a good first pet snake. Stay tuned. So I'm going to be talking about a few categories that I think you should consider when you're getting your first snake. And those are ease of care, the hardiness of the animal, which is kind of related, temperature, how big they're going to get, and then also their availability, so like how easy or hard they are to find. So for ease of care, this is really where the Mexican Black Kingsnake does super well, in my opinion. They can tolerate a wide range of humidities, so if you live in a fairly dry area... Hi, we'll wait until he gets settled in. See ya! So if you live in a fairly dry area like I do, it's still really easy to get them to shed. I have never once had a problem with him shedding, and the humidity has fluctuated between like 20% up to... So it's really easy to get these guys to shed, and you can choose pretty much whatever substrate you want for them, as long as it's not something that's super damp all the time. But they'll tolerate if you live in an area with a higher ambient humidity, that's fine as well. Similarly, it's really easy to give them a hot spot and a cool end because they tolerate a really wide range of temperatures. So if you get your hot spot really anywhere between like 85 to 90, 92 even, they're going to be fine with that and thermoregulate along that gradient. And then you can also have your temperatures drop like as low as 70 at night, and that's not a big deal either. So for a beginner keeper who is just getting a feel for how to control all the electronics and the humidity, it's not too hard, and they will tolerate if you make some mistakes or have some inconsistencies while you're still getting a feel for how to do all of that. So that really leads into the next category, which is hardiness. These snakes are really, really hardy. You can do a lot to them and they'll continue to survive, and in a lot of conditions even still thrive. One really kind of important element of hardiness is also willingness to eat. So some snakes, if their environmental conditions are not perfectly on point, they get stressed, and then most commonly that exhibits in them refusing to eat food. I have never in my life fed this guy and have him not take it. In fact, every single time I feed him, I literally just put the mouse into the enclosure with my tongs, and he snatches it right off the tongs in like a matter of seconds. The one problem that I have run across with him is because he is so active, he's kind of always looking for food, and unfortunately, just with the screen top, I'm gonna see if you can kind of see it on his face here. It's really subtle, but he rubs his nose against the top of the enclosure, not in like a repetitive motion, but just trying to kind of get out of the enclosure and see if he can find a mouse. He just has a little bit of, not quite an injury, but abrasion on his scales, on his nose. So once he kind of grows out of the 20-gallon long that I have him in, I'm going to be moving him into a 40-gallon PVC, so there's no like rough screening material for him to rub his nose against, because I don't want him doing that like for his whole entire life, because then he'll probably just end up with a messed up nose. But that is kind of, I guess, one con of them being so eager to feed, is that they literally never stop looking for food. So our next category is going to be temperament, how easily they're handled, how easily you can get them out of the cage, put them back in the cage, stuff like that. Admittedly, I only have experience with this one individual, but in general, king snakes, they're not prone to be highly defensive. You're just more likely to see them have a strong feeding response. So this means that if you never ever handle your snake and you only feed it, it's totally possible that when you open the enclosure, like your snake will come like barreling out straight toward you, because they'll think that you have a mouse right there. It's really easy to overcome this. Literally all you have to do is just make sure you handle the snake at least as often as you feed the snake. If you feed them once a week, just make sure to handle them once a week. You can always hook train your snake, so just use a hook, rub it against their bodies, kind of a cue for them that they're about to get handled, and then when you give them a mouse, you don't do that, so they realize that they're getting fed and not picked up. But aside from that, you'll see probably a little bit of defensiveness when they're babies. But honestly, I've never had him strike at me defensively when he was a baby. He would just sometimes rattle his tail, kind of like in a rattlesnake imitation. But it was really good that he did that, because then I knew he was stressed and I would just back off, give him a couple seconds, and then go in again once he had calmed down a little bit, and I never had any problems. Even though they're very unlikely to bite you, there is a difference basically between colubrid behavior in general and something like a python behavior, and that's why a lot of people recommend ball pythons as a first snake, despite some of the more difficult aspects of their care, because colubrids in general, especially when they're babies, they're just more active. I mean, I'm saying this and he's literally sitting perfectly still. They do tend to be more active. They move around a lot more. So like you see, even though he's very calm and moving pretty slow, he's not just like sitting still, like draped around my neck or something. He's still on the move. And when they're babies, they are much faster. So for someone who has never really interacted with snakes before, that can potentially be a little bit more intimidating. You're dealing with an animal that's moving around a lot, is potentially a bit skittish. So if it gets startled, it might make a sudden movement. So like even if I like, he's not scared at all. I just touched him on his face and he didn't even care. But maybe I'll insert a clip in the video of when he was coming up to my mouth and something startled him, so he just like pulled back really fast. And honestly, it's just those like fast movements that when you're not prepared for it, if you're a very brand new snake owner, that might be like a little bit more intimidating. But honestly, like if you're getting a snake as a pet, like you want a snake as a pet. The fact that it might be moving around a little bit more, honestly, it's not that big of a deal. Once they get a bit of size on them, they stop just being scared of absolutely everything, because they're big enough that it's less likely that every creature in the world is going to eat them. So they become a lot more confident, they get used to you and their environment, and then they're really just a piece of cake. Size-wise, these guys I think are actually a really perfect beginner snake for size. They don't stay like extremely tiny, like something like, I don't know, like a garter snake, I guess. Snakes that are really small can be difficult to handle because they tend to be faster and they're really tiny and fragile when they're babies. He was smaller as a baby. He was maybe like a foot long, less than a foot long. And as you can see now, he's got quite a bit of size on him, about 2 fingers, and he is 2 years old. So he's still gonna put on a bit of length and width. Adult king snakes are usually like 3 to 4 feet. I do not expect that he'll take anything larger than a small rat. If you want, you can even probably feed king snakes on adult mice their entire life. This is really almost like the perfect size for a beginner, because it's like hefty enough that you don't have to be worried about hurting it or it like darting away once it kind of reaches its sub-adult to adult size. But they don't get too big. Like 4 feet on a snake is really not particularly large. It's pretty average. They're actually a little bit smaller even than corn snakes. The also upside of that is that they're not going to need a really massive enclosure. For a full-grown adult, you'll probably want something equivalent to about 40 gallons. 40-gallon tank is about 3 feet across, and then usually 2 feet or 1.5 feet deep, something like that. But that's still not taking up a huge footprint in your house. It's not like a 4 to 6 foot long tank for a massive snake or anything. So in terms of availability, or basically where you can find these snakes, that's kind of the other category that these guys are a little bit iffy on. Especially here in Canada, they're pretty hard to find. There's a higher demand for them currently than there are people who breed them usually, so that also means they're a little bit more expensive, and they don't often show up in pet stores. You can sometimes find these in pet stores, usually just like reptile specific ones, which there are not a lot of reptile specific pet stores. So usually you're gonna have to be searching around online, finding maybe Facebook groups, or in Canada we have a website called Reptile Classifieds. Then again, if you are watching YouTube videos like this and doing research on your snake, that probably means you're willing to put in at least a little bit more effort than just walking into a pet store and impulse buying an animal. So it should not be like that big of a deal for you to look around online a little bit more and find these guys. Okay, so in summary, we're looking at ease of care, hardiness, temperament, size, and availability for these guys. And honestly, they do pretty well on all of these categories. They're really, really easy to care for, and they will tolerate mistakes in husbandry. That's not to say that you can neglect this snake or just make a mistake and not fix it, but they're not going to suddenly drop dead because you're making beginner mistakes. Their temperament can be a little bit sketchier for people who are already uncomfortable with snakes, especially when they're younger, because they tend to be quicker and a little bit skittish. However, I have seen very little defensive behavior from this guy, and I haven't taken any defensive bites in the whole time that I've had him. Size-wise, they're about the perfect size for a beginner snake. They don't get particularly large, but they're also not so tiny that they're difficult to handle or anything like that. And availability, they're a little bit harder to find, but if you just spend a little while looking around the internet or have a little bit of patience, you should be able to source one, although you're probably gonna have to shell out a few hundred at this point, unfortunately. But that's okay, they're totally worth it, right? Right, Tex? You're the best. Okay, till next time. Bye, guys. Let me know if you would like any other videos. Please like, comment, subscribe if you enjoyed this content. I'll be putting out some more reptile information and also Mexican Black Kingsnake videos. If you liked learning about Mexican Black Kingsnakes, I have a care guide as well. Please check that out, and thanks for watching. So regular 40-gallon tank, you're usually looking at 3 feet across. What was I gonna say?